May the words of my lips and the meditations of all our hearts always be pleasing in your sight. Lord God, you are our rock and our redeemer. Amen. An ancient tale tells of a man and woman who lived by the shore of the ocean in a fishing village. And they were blessed with 2 sons. And every morning, the mom would take the 2 boys to the ocean to see their father off on his fishing voyages. And every time they got to the shore, the boys acted very differently to their father. One of the boys went face the ocean as the ship went away toward the ocean, and the other would face with his back toward the sea and face the village. And so they decided to name the boys Toward and Away. Years went by, and Toward and Away finally got old enough that they were able to join their father on a fishing voyage. And so the 3 men got in the boats and off they went. And months went by, and finally the ship arrived back on shore, and Mum was there to greet her men, but only her husband got off the boat. And she said, "Where are the boys?" And the men said, "Well, we had a tragedy. Our first month out, Toward got hold of a great fish, and he battled it for hours, and hours turned into days, and he fought and he fought and he fought, and finally the fish grabbed him and threw him over the boat and consumed him." And the wife said, "That must have been a huge, horrible, gigantic fish." And the husband said, "Yes, it was. But you should have seen the one that got away." That's a groaner, see? That's a real groaner, isn't it? But aren't all fishing stories groaners? Aren't all fishing tales like that? Come on, everybody's got one. You've heard them all. Oh, he was 20 feet if he was an inch. The waves were 1,000 feet if they were a foot. I don't even know how we got back. It's the most amazing thing in the world. We had a fishing tale in our family. I remember my brother was about 8 years old, and I was about 11 or 12, and I was away at camp. And we used to have my grandmother had a cottage in Erie Beach. And I called home once from camp, and my brother answered the phone. I called the cottage. And he said, Dad and I went out fishing, and I caught a 8-foot pickerel. And I said, "Yeah, right." Like my brother was 4 foot, 75 pounds soaking wet. There's no way. We battled all day, he said. "Yeah, it was amazing. Dad didn't even help me. I got it all in, and we brought it to shore, and I got this big fish." And I said, "Yeah, right." That was our big fishing story from our family. That tall tale came from Erie Beach. But that's what fishing tales are all about. And the disciples had quite a tale to tell when they got back from their fishing trip, didn't they? I mean, you wonder how people would have reacted to their story. "How was your fishing trip, boys?" "Well, we didn't catch anything." But the risen Jesus was there. The one who was dead and crucified and buried. He was there. And he stood on the beach. And he called us. And Peter got so excited that he put his clothes on and jumped in the water. And we rowed to shore. And he told us if we moved our nets, we'd get more fish, and we did. It was a miracle. And then when we got to the beach, he sat with us, and he had a fire going. And we sat, and he cooked fish, and we cooked fish, and we ate, and we talked, and we spent the morning together. That would have been quite a tale for people to hear from those fishing, for sure. I mean, how would you have reacted if you had heard that story back in the fishing village? Or maybe a better question for us today is, how have we reacted since we heard that story 2 weeks ago? Hallelujah! Christ is risen. The Lord is risen indeed. That is a tall tale. That is a story that many people hear and could only classify it as a tall tale. It falls into that category. Some will have heard it for the very first time, perhaps apt to dismiss it altogether. Others have heard it their whole lives. It has inspired, it has given hope. But often when the story is complete, They go home, get on with their lives, and continue on their journeys. Most of us end up in that spot. The story has been told, our guests are gone. Aside for Joy coming 3 days a week to water flowers, there's not many left. They've moved on. Easter candy is 75% off at Walmart and changed to Mother's Day cards. Right? It's done. It's finished. That's exactly where the disciples were. Last week, the risen Jesus appeared to them in their house. This week, they decided to leave that experience where it was. A wonderful moment, an amazing event, but a moment. It was time to continue with their lives and get back to what they knew best. And Peter said, I'm going fishing. And they said, yeah, let's just go back. Let's just go fishing. This is what they did all their lives. This is where Jesus found them. It would make sense that this is where they would go, back to the comfort zone, the place they knew best, the soothing rocking of the boat, the salty odor of the sea, these things that were comfortable and familiar to them. But despite how tempting it was for them to just go back and to stay where it was comfortable, Jesus needed them somewhere else. Our story today on this third week of Easter is Jesus recalling his disciples. Jesus calls them again, come back, I need you. He calls them out of their old lives, back into something new again. He recommissions them to go out with a renewed commitment, to spread the good news, to feed. And in that moment, it's decision time for these fishermen. They are on that edge of returning completely to their old lives or moving forward into something new with their Lord and risen Savior. And if they stay in their boats, that's pretty safe and easy. I mean, they know Jesus is there. They can kind of see him. But he's far enough away that they really don't have to commit. Probably good to keep him over there and we'll stay over here. Or will they make that decision to move forward, even though they don't recognize exactly what it is? Will they return to being fishers, or will they commit to being fishers of people? On this third week of Easter, God recalls the church. God recalls us. Today, our lives continue in so many different ways. Back to our work, back to our routines, back to our service groups, our families. Yet Holy Spirit grabs us today as Christians gather around the world. Spirit grabs us through the story from John's Gospel and has us see that God calls us back, as God always does. Despite our need and desire to stay back there where it's comfortable, God's desire is to draw us into this new world, into this new life given in the resurrection of Jesus. Easter means that the world's different now. It's changed, and we got to be part of that. You and I are part of this new life, and we are called to take the risk of staying where we are and being comfortable, or risk journeying into that new place created at Easter in the resurrection. There's different kinds of risks. One kind is risks that you just have to take. I mean, there's no other options available to you. The second kind of risk is one that, well, you can afford to take because you've calculated the cost and it evens out, it's worth it. The third kind of risk is a risk that you can't afford to take. You've calculated the cost, but you know it would just be disastrous. And the fourth is a risk that you cannot afford not to take. And thanks be to God, the disciples chose option 4. A risk they could not afford not to take. It is a risk to respond to Jesus' call. It is a risk because in the presence of Jesus, we may be challenged, as Peter was, and be uncomfortable. We may encounter paths that are unfamiliar, as the disciples did, going from catching fish to actually having to take that fish out and feed people. It could be a place that is uncomfortable, but we must remember it is always a place that we will be fed and served by God just as they were fed and served on that beach by the risen Christ. You see, there is the life that we have constructed for ourselves, and we live in that and we honor that. But there is also a life that God is calling us to. And often they are rarely the same. And that is a risk. I can tell you that my brother has a den in his home. And you know what's on that wall? It's a big 6-foot pickerel. And a plaque underneath. And it says, Summer, July, 1978. He actually caught the bloody fish. And I didn't believe a word of it. But you know what that is for me? That fish on the wall is a sign and a reminder and evidence that when we can touch and feel and see the truth of the story, we have no other choice but to believe, embrace, and enter into it. And my friends, when the world sees the evidence of the risen Christ and touches that evidence and feels the new world that God has ushered in at Easter, they will have no choice but to believe. And suddenly the tall tale is not that. It is true. It is real. The story of the resurrection will remain a tall tale as long as the disciples of Jesus, the church, decides to choose only their life over and above the life God calls them to. It is a life that feeds. Our call today, and every time we gather at this table to be fed by the risen Christ, is to be recalled into the life that God has called each and every one of us to through the waters of our baptism. We are all joined in that together. And we join in that so that the world can touch and feel and see that Jesus is risen and alive and God's new world is real. When we seek and serve Christ in all people, the world sees resurrection. When we love our neighbor as well as our enemy, the world is fed by the risen Jesus. When we clothe the naked, comfort those who mourn, strive for justice and peace, and respect the dignity of every human being, when we strive to safeguard God's good creation, the world touches the risen Jesus, and they know the story is true. And this world slowly moves from the nightmare it often seems to be into the dream that God has for it. Let's tell our tale so that the world can touch it and see it and believe. Hallelujah, Christ is risen. The Lord is risen indeed. Hallelujah.